Hello and welcome to this episode of Political Bark. Today I am here in Oslo, Norway, discussing a very interesting topic that is governance, not in Europe, which is a very interesting place to discuss politics these days, but on a different continent, which is the African continent. And I have the pleasure of having with me Mr. Freddy Yves Ndjemba, coming originally from Cameroon, but here in Norway. So welcome to Political Bark podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. My pleasure.
So I want to ask you first and foremost, how come you are here in Norway?
Life happened. I consider myself to be an African enthusiast, but also a governance specialist. And 9 years ago, for professional reasons, I moved here to Norway, and I've been exploring professional endeavors, working in the governance field, but also learning about the culture and understanding how it operates and can relate to the African context as well.
Okay, interesting. And your background is therefore highly linked to governance and how to govern.
Yes, how to manage public resources and how to make sure that public monies are managed in the interest of the people. And as you're aware of, this is a challenge that is very prevalent in Africa, making sure that governance and public monies are managed for the people. So I'm very fortunate to operate in that line of work and also see how this is done in countries like Norway.
I think you have a very unique background paired with your not only nationality, but also your trajectory in life. I think governance is a topic that not everyone is interested in. It can be a very, not only difficult, but also at times slow-moving topic. Can you talk a bit about your upbringing and how you have lived in different countries and how that has shaped?
I don't really like to talk about myself, but I think it's quite important as well for the audience to know me a bit better. I've been fortunate and privileged to grow up with parents who lived in various countries and continents, started in Europe, moved to Africa, then North America, and finally, for professional reasons, Africa and Europe. So I believe that throughout this journey, I've been able to get an opening on how the world is, learning different culture, how much is important to be inclusive and tolerant. And I do believe that whatever you want to do in life, you have to make sure that you have those values in place. And that upbringing really opened me up to that.
Very interesting. In many ways, you've been here then for almost a decade, studying and seeing the governance model here. What do you think about Norwegian governance?
Norwegian governance to me is very transparent and also inclusive. And I think those are two attributes that are essential when you want to bring the public with you and the citizen, to make sure that they have access to the information, but that they can also contribute to decision making. So if I were to compare the Norwegian model with maybe other models in Europe, those were two of the characteristics that stand out. There's transparency, constant push for transparency, but also making sure that there's a level of inclusiveness.
All right. So, okay, I'm a student of public policy and governance. You're working in governance. For a lot of the listeners, they're not that familiar with governance. Can you explain what you mean by transparency in the Norwegian system?
As we know, Norwegian is a country where you have a lot of oil, as it is in a lot of African countries. But what I've seen, maybe through the oil fund, is that you can see in real time what is made with all of the investment, how the portfolio is evolving, and that level of transparency also enables the scrutiny, making sure that you know what is done, when and what. And I can assure you, having this sort of like global background, that this is not something that is very common. And I do believe that this is also part of why this is managed so successfully.
Why Norway's oil fund is managed very differently from a lot of different countries. So transparency again. Does that mean that the citizens have access to see how money is governed over, how it's redistributed? Do they have, are they allowed to be very much inside the ministries and seeing things. Is that what's happening in Norway, or?
I wouldn't be in a position to say how it's happening, but at least from the way I'm seeing it, I believe that there's a level of information on what is done. Now, being involved in how things are done, to me, this is not really transparency. It's more about participation. So I would really insist in the transparency element that I think is very present. Now the participation is maybe making decision on what is made with those monies. And that I think is more the political side of it, and how you deal with parliament and how you deal with empowering as well people. And that part I think is also present, but to me that's also another element that I think is quite distinctive.
Interesting. Okay, so let's go into the main topic today, which is the future of the African continent. I'm very much fond of the African continent. I haven't been to, definitely not to all of the countries, but to a few of them, and I absolutely love being in Africa. I've lived in Egypt, it's North Africa. I was recently in Senegal, and it was super interesting to see how the society there has evolved, and it's a very well-functioning country. I want to start with asking about Burkina Faso, and we have a new leader there, Ibrahim Traoré. He used to be in the French Foreign Legion, I think, as a military man. His wife is a French lady from the French police, gendarmerie. And he has been a revolutionary figure in Burkina Faso that has really, at least in what he says, taken back the power to the country and first and foremost militarized and changed a lot of the security situation, because there was a lot of problems with ISIS and Boko Haram. And he is therefore a guy that has said now, sorry, he's not a guy, he's a president. He has said now that he wishes for everyone in Burkina Faso to understand that we are not looking at democracy right now. We are looking at securing the country in a very strategic way, and we are in a revolutionary phase. So Burkina Faso is seen as a country that is really unique in Africa right now. Many Western powers will be very angry at what's happening there, because they're changing in a very independent way. But at the same time, many citizens are very happy about this independent way of dealing with the country and dealing with its resources also. So this long introduction, but I want to ask, in your thinking, how would you like to govern if you were to govern? I like to be free at Political Bark. We like to imagine and be creative. If you were to be the president of an African country, how would you see things?
I really like the fact that you refer to Burkina Faso and President Traoré, because I think part of the African challenge is also understanding our place in history. And if you look at Burkina Faso, how it is today, and President Traoré, you can see this is a new iteration of what happened 40 to 50 years ago with Thomas Sankara, where you had a very charismatic leader who came of age, had a very ambitious agenda, and was there for the people. Unfortunately, his life was cut short, but now we do see that 50 years later, Traoré is picking up the mantle. So what I would like to mean by that is that you have to stand on the shoulders of those who were there before. You have to understand as well what they have done, what were their ambition, and how can you bring this forward. So if I were to implement a leadership, it would be to build on what was done and make sure that it is for the people. Because unfortunately, what you see in a lot of African countries is that we have lost that original promise of making sure that we're making things for the people. So that would be at the core of my leadership, to make sure that you involve the people, that it's transparent, inclusive, and that you make sure that you give them a say in how things are managed. You manage for them and with them.
Interesting, and I think it's very positive outlook for Africa, if that was to be possible. Traoré has been in a very militant way, also focusing on security, perhaps because of his strong background from the army. That's his field. Your field is governance. So let's think about democracy then. Democracy is an idea, it doesn't really exist, but we always talk about it and say we strive for it. In your way, if you're going to govern an African country, how would you bring about democratic elements?
I do believe that the concept of democracy has to be contextualized. And I remember we were discussing about certain questions before, and you were telling me, okay, if in 2026 you had to rule a country with a lot of resources, how would you do it? Basically, and that might surprise, I would do it exactly how they were doing it in 1314.
1314?
Exactly. And why do I take the year of 1314? Because in 1314, in one part of Africa, you had one kingdom that they called the Kingdom of Mali. And there you had one individual who was called Mansa Musa and was considered as one of the richest men in the world. And he was managing all the gold with inclusion and making sure that he was making his people happy. So I do believe that it's quite important to look back at what has succeeded and make sure that we can implement it properly. And what I say regarding Mansa Musa, the Kingdom of Mali, and a lot of those places is documented. As an anecdote, Mansa Musa in 1324 went through pilgrimage to the Mecca, and he went through Cairo. And he had so much gold that the level of gold and the price of gold dropped down in that country. And that is sort of documented by multiple scholars. So it shows that before the period of colonization, there was already an African history and an African fabric. And it's quite important to reconnect to it and understand how they did it for the betterment of the community, how they operated. And obviously, this is definitely something that would take a lot of cue from.
So it's a governance model from the 13th century.
A governance model from those communities, how they were operating, because to understand the African context, you have to understand that you're trying to put together different communities. There's not that sense of unity. And how do you make different communities with different backgrounds coexist? You have to consult. You have to be inclusive. Those are some of the keywords that you have to put in place. And those mechanisms, how do you make sure that you have a collegial decision-making process? And when you look at a lot of these ancient kingdoms, that's how they were operating. And that's why, in their ways, they were very successful. We have moved to a system where you have one individual trying to decide for the whole collectivity. Obviously, it doesn't work.
But that system was implemented from the colonial times when they
Yes.
drew the maps and then changed everything.
Yes.
So they derooted then the system that was in place and then put in order, let's say, French rule plus local rulers. And then let's say the local rulers have stayed a few people today. Africa is a continent that has some of the oldest presidents in the world. It's a country that is a continent that needs perhaps a lot of renewal in that sense, especially since the population is so young. But so it's a very interesting governance model you're pointing to, and I think it would be, since the 13th century, it would be the first time it's back.
At the country level,
Yeah.
because it's still operating at the community level. So then how can you make sure that your institutions have to match your reality? What we do see is that a lot of the institutions that are placed in African countries don't fit with the realities that is at the community level. I'll just take an example of a country like Nigeria. You have Nigeria, a country of approximately 100 million inhabitants, or less. But within Nigeria, you have 3 different kingdoms. You have the kingdoms of the Yoruba, which you find in Nigeria, in Benin and Togo. You have the kingdom of those people from the Sahel. And you also have the kingdom of people from the Biafra. How do you make those people coexist in terms of institution? And that is a challenge that you have in a lot of African countries. You mentioned Senegal. One of the reasons why Senegal is so stable and has been able to adhere to democracy is that prior to the arrival of the French, it was already viewed as a unified society. with some strong community holders that are there still up to this day. So if you want to embed the democracy within the society, it has to be rooted within their structures. That's sort of the disconnect that has to be filled and fixed, in my humble opinion.
Interesting. And if we take it back to today, then 2026, we have different actors. We have Russia, we have China, we have France, we have European actors, the US perhaps. Are they all there because there's a lack of local ownership of the situation at times?
Might say that I always like history, but I would also say that foreign presence in Africa is nothing new. If you go back to history, you will see that the initial Chinese presence from, I would say, maritime standpoint, dates back to the 12th or the 13th century. They were already exploring what was in Africa. You had the presence of people from the Indian Ocean around the 10th century, right? But what happened at that time is that those countries, or called community, had ownership on what they do. The challenge is now is that a lot of these rulers don't have ownership when it comes to those decisions. They are forced into agreements, and it's not always for the betterment of their people. So I don't believe that you can live in a stage where you're not interacting with people. That has never been the story of Africa. Africa has always interacted with other powers. Now the challenge is how can you claim back ownership of the relationship, right? To make sure that you discuss and you bring things to your advantage. That's more the challenge that I see, rather than the fact that they're dealing with external partners.
Yes. Would you say that there's a power gap then right now between the leaders that are in place in many countries and what's happening in terms of businesses being made, deals being made with, I don't know, let's say Chinese mining companies, where the country is losing a lot of its upper hand on what's happening?
Yeah, it's not just a power gap, it's a competency gap, it's a capacity gap, and it's a governance gap. Who is involved in making those decisions on whether to go to Chinese or whether Russians or whether French? How these decisions are taken. Usually by one individual with close aides who are discussing with very powerful individuals, and they don't have the same level of capacity, and they're forced into agreements. So to me, it's not just power gap, it's also understanding the issue and making sure that you consult properly. What I would add to that is, unfortunately, some of the development that we see is societies in Africa are moving way faster than the elites. And you raise that point where you have power staying like for 40 years. Like the ideology stays the same, whereas the society is moving at much faster pace. So there's a big disconnect between those who are in power and actually how the society is moving. And that, I think, is something that is sometimes underestimated. And that's why I believe we need more younger people involved. We need to engage them more broadly. So, yeah.
So very interesting that you mentioned young people. I mean, what is the percentage of young people at, I guess, under the age of 35?
Under the age of 30, probably 70% of the population.
70%?
If you're even able to rely on the statistics,
right?
Because there's also a question of like the validity of the statistics, but more
Which
or less
is,
70%.
Which is, if it's 70%, then they have all the ruling power of that country.
Exactly.
They do.
Exactly.
So why hasn't there been more like upheaval, revolts in African countries if there is such a bad form of governance at times? Why haven't there been more? I mean, I know the Egyptian revolution, it was not directly linked to finance in this. It was linked to religious matters, but why haven't there been more young people asking for their rightful position as leaders?
I think there are multiple reasons to that. A lot of African societies are also based on the idea of seniority, which is a cultural value that you cannot, as someone who is younger, challenge the authority of elders. So a lot of African societies are based on that. So to me, that's one part of the problem. It's not the only part of the problem. The other part of the problem is like younger generation are not really interested or brought into politics and policies and what we would call the matters of the city or the society. So there's also that disconnect between these big portion of the population and actually what we call like the ruling of a country.
Almost the opposite of than Norway, where young people are very much engaged in politics and
Yes.
transparency. So
Yes.
we still have the old guys on the top,
Yeah. And
but
if I
we're
may,
getting there.
If I may, I think when you look at the data and the numbers, you will see that those who are actually voting in these countries are a very limited or narrow portion of the population.
In
In
several African
several
countries.
African countries. So as much as you have presidents winning with 90%,
Yeah.
it's probably 90% of 20% of those who could vote. So one of the question is how can you engage those 80% who are not voting to be involved in politics and understand that they actually have a role to play in how you can run a society.
And that's your vision, basically.
That's the vision of making sure that, that's why I was referring to participation.
Yeah.
How can you convince people that actually fixing public lighting, cleaning the roads, building those roads, building schools, hospitals is something that you can contribute to. You don't have to stay idle and just wait for the state to do it. What is your role in that? And when you go at the community level, you see this happening. But whenever you get to upper echelons at the states, people are just disengaged. So that disconnect, I think, is also something that we could bring.
So now you're at the beginning of your second career. Let's call it like that. Your second visionary career for the future. And in order to do that in 2026, you're using means such as social media, such as interviews, such as podcasts, in order to reach young people. So I think social media, and this is one of the perhaps most efficient ways to reach all of those millions of young people that need to be informed. And then the next step would then be to guide them towards where they can participate, perhaps.
Absolutely, because to me, I think whatever you start, you need to be able to visualize success. As I said, we are now in a position where only 20% of those who can vote. If we get to a point where 50% of them can cast a ballot, understand what is politics, why it matters, I think that's already progress.
Yeah.
Whether it is through one individual that it's done, I think at the end of the day, what you're trying to achieve is systemic change. You have to unlock the power of the people by educating them and showing them some sort of vision that they can adhere to.
I mean, this is in radical opposition to a lot of the things that are trending, let's say in Lagos or in Abidjan right now, which is a lot of people get money fast and spend money fast and buy expensive cars imported and go partying, etc., and have a very flashy lifestyle. I think it all came a bit from Nigeria, maybe a little bit introduced by the US. I think this is in radical opposition to that in many ways, and I think it's a very more, let's say, more holistic and healthy way of introducing new ways of thinking. I think maybe the youth before in African countries used to be more interested in these less glamorous topics, that is politics and history and governance.
Yes, as they say, if you don't know where you're coming from, you'll never know where you want to go. So I think it's quite important to reconcile people with their history and not just on a decade basis, but more understanding what was Africa's place in human history and how can you translate it to your individual journey. I also believe that, unfortunately, you refer to the case of Egypt and the Arab Springs. Around the 90s, there was already a democratic push in a lot of sub-Saharan African countries, which didn't translate into improvement in governance. So people got also disenchanted. And I think that also explains why a lot of them not are involving. But going back to the point that I was making on President Traoré and President Sankara. It's not because you have failed once that you shouldn't try again.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that now
Mm-hmm.
it's also an opportune time to try again.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe differently, wisely, understanding what was done, but I think we have no other choice than to try.
Yeah, and you're one of those people that is going to try now, which is yeah, a great way to live out the career. I think the real beginning of all of this will be when you have your feet on the ground in the country that you're going to be working with your hands and and everything inside. Yeah, this is a very interesting and global start. This is the beginning in Norway, where we're talking a little bit about the Nordic perspective of transparency, and then moving into Paris, perhaps, and the US, and so on, before entering the big continent of Africa. Do you have anything you would like to add to the young people listening about your steps ahead? Perhaps a few motivational words also.
I think it's not about me, it's about creating a movement.
Mm-hmm.
It's about discovering yourself. As I tend to say, as much as I travel the world, I discover the world, but I discover myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I think exposure is quite important. So I would also encourage those who want to discover, to learn more, and would also help them in their personal journey. I think the future is bright. Some say Africa is the future. I think the present is now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think we should even look at the future. When we look at some of these undercurrents, it's already happening. Just take an example when I was saying that society is moving quite quickly. You have elements like mobile money.
Yeah.
In a lot of African countries. It has picked up in African countries where now people are not using the banking systems, they're using their phone to make all these transactions. You have these things in place that have been created by Africans.
Mm.
Now it's time to take it up another level and claim the place that is ours on the continent, for the continent, and also over the world.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.